She's not worthless. Ryan M. Montgomery's voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade through silk. His calloused hand reached toward Nikki L. Larue, not with pity, but with something she hadn't seen in a man's eyes for 20 years. Respect. Nikki stood in Silver Creek's town square, her 5-year-old frame straight as a Montana pine despite the weight of their stares. No one had defended her in decades. The rumors had started the moment her brother rode into Silver Creek, Montana territory that October morning of 1886. They said Nikki L. Larue was too old to be worth keeping, too gray to deserve kindness, too used up to ever belong anywhere again. Raymond Larue had brought her here after his wife Clara demanded it. One less mouth to feed before winter, one less burden. The autumn sun cast long shadows across wooden storefronts, cold enough to burn. Nikki's weathered hands stayed steady at her sides, even as men looked her over like cattle at auction. She had survived 65 years of being invisible. She would survive this too. Widow Larue, 65 years old, a man announced with disgust. Might do for cooking or mending if she lasts the winter. Laughter rippled through the crowd like poison. Who'd waste food on something that old? Someone jeered. Then Ryan Montgomery pushed forward, his storm-blue eyes locked on Nikki as if she were the only person breathing. He was young, 32, with dark hair touched by premature gray and a tan canvas jacket dusty from hard riding. But his voice carried the weight of a man who had buried everything he loved and refused to bury himself with it. And in that moment, Nikki wondered, could mercy exist in a world this cruel? If this story moves you, if you've ever felt invisible because of your age, don't let it disappear. Subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Raymond Larue's voice carried across the town square with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. She's 65. Can't expect me to feed her forever. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, as if volume could justify what he was doing. Nikki felt the crowd's eyes crawl over her like insects. A woman near the general store whispered loud enough to be heard. Too old for field work. Too gray for marriage. What good is she? The words should have cut deeper than they did. But Nikki had heard variations of them for 20 years now, ever since men's gazes started sliding past her as though she'd become invisible. She stood straighter, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Then Ryan Montgomery's voice cut through the murmuring like a winter wind. You're abandoning your own sister? Raymond turned, his face flushing. That's family business, Montgomery. It became my business when you made it a public spectacle. Ryan's storm-blue eyes held steady. What kind of man does this? A practical one. Raymond's jaw tightened. She's had her life. Time she figures out what's left of it. The casual cruelty hung in the air. Nikki kept her face smooth, her breathing even. She had survived worse than this. Ryan's gaze shifted to her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Not pity, something else entirely. I have a cattle ranch 12 miles north, he said. I need help I can trust. Fair wages, separate cabin, freedom to leave anytime. Equal partnership in the work. The crowd went silent. Women's mouths fell open. Men exchanged glances of disbelief. Nikki stared at him, certain she'd misheard. Why would you hire someone my age? Ryan stepped closer. Because everyone else sees your age. I see someone who survived 65 years in a world that eats people alive. That's the strength I need. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. I've been alone too long on that ranch. I need someone who won't quit when winter gets hard. Equal partnership? The words felt foreign on her tongue. In the work, yes, and fair wages besides. His calloused hand extended toward her. If you're willing. Around them, the crowd erupted in whispers. Montgomery's gone soft in the head. Offering such terms to a woman her age, unseemly. Nikki looked at Ryan's outstretched hand. She thought of her brother's cold dismissal, of 20 years of being told she was too old to matter. Then she placed her weathered hand in Ryan Montgomery's calloused palm. His fingers closed around hers, firm, warm, respectful. The crowd gasped, but Nikki barely heard them. For the first time in decades, someone had chosen to see her. Not as a burden, but as someone worthy of respect. Let's go, Ryan said quietly. They walked to his wagon through a gauntlet of stairs. Raymond called after them. Don't come crying to me when it doesn't work out. But Nikki didn't look back. The journey north took them through Montana landscape, painted in autumn golds and bronzes. Mountains rose in the distance like sentinels. The air smelled of pine and coming snow. Neither spoke much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the quiet between two people who understood that some things didn't need words. When they crested the final rise, Nikki saw it. The Montgomery Ranch spread across a valley like a promise. Vast, beautiful. Struggling, yes, she could see that in the sagging fence lines and weathered barn, but alive, still fighting. Ryan pulled the wagon to a stop and pointed to a small cabin set apart from the main house. "That's yours. Your own door. Your own lock. Your own space." Nikki looked at the cabin, at the door that would be hers alone, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not pain, hope, raw and terrifying and real. For the first time in 20 years, she had a place where she belonged. Not because someone tolerated her presence, but because someone saw her worth. And that changed everything. The smell of coffee woke Nikki before dawn. She lay still in the narrow bed, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling, the absence of Clara's sharp voice. Then she remembered. This was her cabin, her door, her choice. Light glowed from the main house windows. When she entered, Ryan stood at the stove, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. Bread and preserves sat on the table. "Figured we'd need something in us before we start," he said. No commands, no cruelty, just respect. They worked side by side as the sun climbed higher, checking fence lines across rolling grassland. Ryan showed her the boundaries, the water sources, the cattle patterns. He didn't talk down to her, he just worked, and she worked beside him, and the rhythm felt natural. By midday, they reached a collapsed fence section. Posts lay scattered, wire tangled in dead grass. "This'll take most of the afternoon," Ryan said, unloading replacement posts. "These weigh about 50 pounds each. I can—" Nikki lifted 2 posts, one balanced on each shoulder, and carried them to the worksite without breaking stride. Ryan stopped mid-sentence, staring. She set the posts down and turned back. "What? You're going to hurt yourself. I've carried heavier." She hoisted another pair. His face darkened, not with anger at her, but fury at the world. "Your brother worked you into the ground." Nikki paused, posts balanced on her shoulders. "Yes, but now I know what I'm capable of." They worked in silence after that, the kind shared by 2 people who understood that some truths didn't need elaboration. By sunset, the fence stood strong again, and Nikki's muscles ached in a way that felt satisfying rather than punishing. That evening, Ryan knocked on her cabin door. "If anything doesn't work, the stove, the roof, the latch, you tell me and we'll fix it." He shifted his weight. "This is your home now. It should work the way you need it to." Weeks passed, like pages turning. October gave way to November. The ranch came alive under their shared labor. Cattle settled into patterns. Fences stood straight. The barn roof got patched. Firewood got stacked, and something else changed. Nikki caught herself humming while she worked, laughing at Ryan's dry observations about stubborn cattle. Her shoulders relaxed when she woke instead of tensing against the day ahead. One evening in late November, they sat on the porch watching the sunset behind distant mountains. Ryan cleared his throat. "First cattle sale went well. Better than I expected." He turned to her, his storm blue eyes serious. "I want to offer you something. Stay 2 years, work like you have been, and I'll give you a percentage of the profits when we sell stock, a real stake in the ranch." Nikki's hands trembled. "No one has ever offered me a share of anything." "You're earning it," Ryan said simply. "This ranch needs you. I need—" He stopped, reconsidered his words. "You've earned it, Nikki." She looked out at the valley, at the land she'd helped bring back to life, at the future stretching before her like the Montana horizon. For the first time in 20 years, that future didn't look like just survival. It looked like hope. "Yes," she said, "I'll stay." Ryan's slow smile carried relief and something deeper. Something that made her heart beat faster in a way she thought she'd forgotten. "Good," he said quietly. "That's real good." And in the gathering darkness, with the first stars appearing, Nikki felt something she hadn't felt in decades, like she was exactly where she belonged. The blizzard hit without warning in early November, turning the world white and wild. Nikki made it to the main house just as visibility dropped to nothing. Ryan pulled her inside, snow swirling behind her. "You're staying here tonight," he said, stoking the fire. "Won't be safe to cross to the cabin until this passes." They sat by the fireplace as darkness fell, wind howling outside. The fire cast dancing shadows across Ryan's face. He'd been quiet all evening, watching the flames like he was wrestling with words. "You don't talk much about before," he finally said. Nikki's hands stilled. "No, I suppose I don't. You don't have to, but if you want to." She looked at the fire, gathering the pieces of her life. "I was married 42 years. Thomas was a good man. We raised 4 children on a cattle ranch in Wyoming. He died 3 years ago." Hart gave out checking fences. Ryan nodded, just listening. "The children moved to the cities, Denver, Chicago. After Thomas died, my brother claimed the property, said it was family land, that Thomas had only leased it." She paused. "The children didn't fight it. They had their own lives. And you?" "I went to live with Raymond and Clara, helped with their children, worked the house and garden." Her hands twisted together. "They didn't want an old woman around, Ryan. I reminded them of death." Ryan's jaw tightened, firelight catching the anger in his eyes. "Not at her. Never at her. You deserved better. You still do." The words settled over her like a warm blanket. She'd waited 3 years to hear someone say that. "Why are you really alone out here?" she asked quietly. "Young man like you should have a wife, children." Ryan's expression shifted, grief carving deeper lines. "I had a wife, Margaret. We were married 5 years. He stared into the flames. "She died bringing our daughter into the world. Rosemary lived 3 hours, 5 years ago, February." Nikki's breath caught. "Ryan." "People looked at me different after, like I was cursed, like grief was contagious." He turned to her, his storm blue eyes raw. "I know what it's like to be alone, Nikki. To be invisible to people because they see your grief and don't know what to do with it." The wind howled outside, but inside the fire crackled warm. Nikki understood then why Ryan had seen her when everyone else looked away. Why he'd offered respect when the world offered contempt. He knew what it meant to be dismissed for circumstances beyond your control. "We're quite a pair," she said softly. "Yes." His hand rested on the bench between them, inches from hers. "We are." They sat in silence, but it wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of recognition, of 2 people who'd survived losses that should have broken them and somehow hadn't. The fire burned low. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, something else was building, something neither had the courage to name yet. Ryan's voice came quiet through the darkness. "I'm grateful you're here, Nikki." The way he said her name, soft, almost reverent, made her heart stutter. Not like she was old, not like she was a burden, like she was Nikki, just Nikki, and that was enough. She turned to look at him, and in the dying firelight, she saw her own longing reflected back. Everything had changed. They came at dawn in late November, 7 riders emerging from the mist like ghosts. Nikki was feeding the chickens when she heard the horses. She straightened, every instinct screaming danger. Ryan stepped out of the barn, his body rigid. The lead rider was thick-set with a scar cutting through his eyebrow. He didn't dismount. "Name's Dutch Keller. I work for Mr. Silas Blackwood." His voice carried like a threat. "He's made you a generous offer for this property. Thought I'd see if you'd reconsidered." "I haven't received any offer," Ryan said, jaw tight. "Then let me make it clear. Mr. Blackwood's willing to pay a fraction of what this land's worth. You sell, you walk away with something." "You don't." Dutch gestured with lazy menace. "Accidents happen out here. Fires, stampedes, people disappear." Ryan's hand moved toward the rifle leaning against the barn. Nikki stepped forward, her voice calm as still water. "Threats of arson are federal crimes in Montana territory. 7 witnesses makes prosecution easy." Dutch's eyes cut to her, sneering. "Old woman thinks she's smart. I think you were sent to scare us without actually committing crimes that would bring the marshal." Nikki held his gaze without flinching. "I think Blackwood wants deniability. But 7 men making threats is evidence. We'll be filing a complaint." Dutch spat into the dirt. "You're making a mistake, Montgomery." He turned to Nikki, his expression ugly. "And you should have stayed where old women belong." "And where is that?" Nikki asked quietly. For a moment Dutch seemed caught off guard. Then his face hardened. "This isn't finished." The riders thundered away, leaving dust and threat in the cold air. Ryan stared at Nikki, his face pale. "That was either brilliant or we just painted a target on our backs." "Both, probably." Her hands shook now that the riders were gone. "But we can't let them think fear works." Within the hour, they were riding to Silver Creek. Marshal Webb listened to their account with a stone face. "Blackwood's been pushing boundaries for months, but he's careful. He tapped the paper where Ryan had written the riders' names. This gives me grounds to watch him. Official complaint means any accident becomes suspicious. Will that stop him? Nikki asked. It'll make him think twice. Men like Blackwood don't like witnesses. Marshal Webb's eyes were hard. Watch yourselves. Keep your rifles close. The ride home stretched in tense silence. Ryan tended the horses while Nikki started dinner, both moving through familiar tasks while darker thoughts churned. That night, sitting across the table, Ryan finally spoke. I won't let anyone hurt you. Nikki met his eyes. We protect each other, Ryan. That's how we survive this. The shift from I to we hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to name. Yes, Ryan said quietly, we do. For weeks, no attack came. The cattle grazed peacefully, the fences held. Winter settled in with cold and snow and nothing burned. But something had shifted between them. They worked closer now, slept lighter, watched the horizon more. And in the quiet moments when their hands brushed passing tools, when their eyes met across the table, when they stood together watching for riders that didn't come, the waiting became its own kind of torture. Not of fear, but of something deeper, something that felt like longing. The cold snap hit mid-December like a fist. Temperatures plunged so low the air itself seemed to crystallize. The creek froze solid, and on the far side, a dozen head of cattle stood stranded. I'll go check them, Nikki said, pulling on her heavy coat. Ryan's jaw tightened. That ice? I know this terrain. I've crossed frozen creeks before. She met his eyes. They need checking, Ryan. He nodded reluctantly. Be careful. The ice held under her boots as she crossed. The cattle were fine, cold, but safe. She checked them quickly, breath clouding white. The return crossing started well. Then she heard it. A crack like a rifle shot. The ice gave way. Freezing water swallowed her whole, so cold it burned. The current grabbed her, pulling her under the ice shelf. She clawed for the surface, lungs screaming. Nikki? Ryan's scream tore across the frozen landscape. Through the distorted ice, she saw him running, saw the ice crack beneath his weight. A branch thrust through the broken surface. She grabbed it with numbing fingers. Ryan hauled her out. She collapsed on the ice, shaking violently. He scooped her up and ran for the cabin. Inside, he stripped her frozen clothes with shaking hands, wrapped her in every blanket, then pulled her against his own body, sharing his heat. Don't you dare leave me, he whispered, his voice breaking. Not you, please, not you. The night stretched endless. Nikki drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring apologies. You have nothing to apologize for, Ryan said, holding her tighter. Just stay, please stay. She felt his tears on her hair, felt his arms like he could hold her to life through sheer will, felt something crack open in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold. Dawn light filtered through the window. Nikki woke to find Ryan's head on her shoulder, both still wrapped in blankets. His arm was locked around her waist. Ryan? He jerked awake, eyes wild before they focused on her face. Nikki. Thank God. Their eyes met. Everything unspoken between them rose to the surface, all the careful distance they'd maintained, all the longing they'd denied, all the fear of wanting something they thought they'd lost the right to have. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. The kiss was desperate and tender all at once, full of denied longing finally released. His hand cupped her face like she was precious. Her fingers tangled in his hair like she was drowning again, and he was air. When they broke apart, both had tears streaming down their faces. I can't lose you, Ryan said, his voice raw. I won't survive it. Then don't let me go, Nikki whispered. That night, wrapped in blankets by the fire while the storm raged outside, they sat pressed together, fingers intertwined. The fear had burned away everything that stood between them. What remained was stark and true and terrifying. Ryan turned to her, his storm-blue eyes holding hers in the firelight. Marry me, Nikki. His voice was steady despite the tears still wet on his face. I don't care what anyone says. I don't care about the years between us or what the town thinks. Marry me. And in the warmth of the fire, still alive when she should have died, Nikki felt her heart break open with hope. Nikki stared at Ryan through tears, the weight of his question settling over her like snow. I'm 65 years old, Ryan. You're 32. People will talk. Let them. He took both her hands in his. I love you. Not despite your age, I don't even think about it that way. I see a woman who survived everything and came out stronger. I see my partner, my equal, The person I want beside me, for whatever time we have. I never thought, her voice broke, at my age, I never thought I'd feel this again. Then feel it now. He leaned his forehead against hers. Say yes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Ryan, I'll marry you. January brought wedding plans and a trip to Silver Creek for supplies. When Ryan posted their marriage announcement outside the general store, the town's reaction was immediate. Women gasped. Men laughed in disbelief. Robbing the grave, Montgomery? Someone called out. She could be your mother. Another voice jeered. Ryan turned to face the crowd, his arm around Nikki's waist. She's my choice, and I'm fortunate she chose me back. They rode home through hostile stares, but Nikki felt no shame. Only Ryan's hand in hers, and the certainty that this was right. Late January brought a blizzard that screamed like something alive. Through the white fury, a figure stumbled toward the house. Ryan caught her before she collapsed, a young woman, half frozen, terror in her eyes. Her name was Elena. Between violent shivers, her story emerged. Silas Blackwood had tried to force her into employment on his ranch. The implications made Nikki's blood run cold. When Elena refused, he'd threatened her family. You're safe now, Nikki said, wrapping another blanket around the girl's shoulders. That night, Ryan and Nikki made a decision. They wouldn't just hide Elena, they would expose Blackwood. The newspaper reporter from Helena listened to Elena's testimony with a face like granite. When the story published, public opinion shifted like a landslide. Other women came forward. The territorial marshal opened a formal investigation. Blackwood's carefully constructed empire began to crumble, but his rage grew with every revelation. The 14th of February 1887 dawned cold and clear. The small church in Silver Creek held only a dozen people: Marshall Webb, Martha the midwife, Elena, and a few others brave enough to stand with them. Nikki wore a simple blue dress. Ryan wore his best shirt, freshly pressed. When the preacher asked the questions, their voices rang clear. I do, Ryan said, his eyes never leaving hers. I do, Nikki answered, tears streaming down her face. Across the street, visible through the church window, Silas Blackwood sat on his horse. The fury in his eyes was palpable, a promise of violence to come. But inside the church, Ryan slipped a thin gold band onto Nikki's finger and kissed her like she was the only woman in the world. Because to him, she was. That night in their cabin, with the fire burning low and the Montana winter howling outside, Nikki lay in Ryan's arms and whispered, I never thought I'd have this again. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, tender and fierce all at once. We're just beginning, Nikki Montgomery. And in the warmth of their bed, with her new name still strange and wonderful on her tongue, Nikki believed him. Despite the threats, despite the town's judgment, despite every impossible thing that said this couldn't work, they were married, they were together, and whatever came next, they would face it as one. Spring came to Montana like a promise kept. Snow melted, the valley turned green, and life returned to the land. Elena, the young woman they'd helped escape Blackwood's clutches, had settled into the household like she'd always belonged. The ranch thrived under their shared labor, the calving season bringing new life and renewed hope. But in April, Nikki woke with exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. The nausea hit without warning, and twice she'd grown dizzy while working. You're seeing the doctor, Ryan said. His jaw set in that way that meant arguing was pointless. Dr. Harrison's examination in Silver Creek lasted longer than it should have. His face grew pale, then flushed, then pale again. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. Mrs. Montgomery, this is highly irregular. Nikki's hands gripped the edge of the examination table. What is it? You appear to be pregnant. The words hung in the air like something impossible made real. Nikki's stunned silence broke into laughter, sharp, disbelieving, then dissolved into tears. At 65, this is medically unprecedented and extremely dangerous. The doctor's face hardened. I won't be party to this situation. I recommend you find other arrangements. The ride home passed in numb silence. Nikki stared at the mountains, her hand pressed against her stomach where impossibly life was growing. Ryan found her on the porch that evening, watching the sunset. She turned to him, and the words spilled out before courage could fail her. I'm pregnant. He froze, completely still, like his heart had stopped beating. Then wonder flooded his face, followed by overwhelming joy, followed immediately by terror. A baby. His voice cracked. We're having a baby. He pulled her into his arms, both of them crying. The life I lost. he whispered into her hair. "The life you never thought you'd have." "Ryan, I'm scared." Nikki's voice shook. "I'm 65. What if? Then we find someone who will help us." He cupped her face in his hands. "We don't do this alone." They found Martha Reeves 3 days later, a woman of 78 with hands gnarled by arthritis but eyes sharp as glass. She listened to their story without judgment. "I've been birthing babies for 60 years, Martha said finally. "I've seen stranger things than a healthy 5-year-old woman having a baby. If you're strong enough to carry, we're strong enough to deliver." In May, during Martha's examination, the old midwife's eyebrows rose. She pressed her hands carefully against Nikki's stomach, then listened with her ear against the swell. "Well," she said, sitting back with a small smile, "there's 2 heartbeats in there." The world tilted. Ryan grabbed the table for support. Nikki couldn't breathe. "Twins!" Ryan's voice was barely a whisper. "Twins," Martha confirmed. 2 miracles instead of 1. The town gossip exploded like wildfire. Unnatural. Shameful. Impossible. Women whispered behind their hands. Men shook their heads. The doctor publicly declared it medical impossibility. But Nikki stood in the general store with her head high, Ryan's hand on the small of her back, and Elena fierce at her side. When Mrs. Peterson made a comment about women who don't know their place, Nikki simply smiled. "My place is exactly where I'm standing," she said quietly. "And I'm not moving." Summer arrived with warmth and light. Against all medical predictions, Nikki's pregnancy progressed impossibly well. The twins grew strong. Martha visited weekly, always reassuring, always certain. But on a hot July evening, dust rose on the horizon. 7 riders approached, and this time, Silas Blackwood himself rode at their head. The wolves had come back. By late July, Nikki's belly had grown round with the impossible weight of twins. She moved carefully through the ranch work, Elena taking on the heavier tasks, while Martha visited weekly with reassurances and wisdom. They were preparing for harvest when the riders came on August 3rd, 7 men emerging from the sunset like judgment itself. This time Silas Blackwood led them personally. He dismounted slowly, his face carved with rage. "You've cost me everything, Montgomery. The newspaper, the marshal's investigation. My contracts." His eyes fixed on Nikki, disgust twisting his features. "And that," he gestured at her pregnant belly, "is an abomination." Ryan stepped in front of her, his hand on his rifle. "You need to leave, now." "Or what?" Blackwood's laugh was cold. "You'll shoot all 7 of us?" "I don't think so." He drew his pistol, aimed it directly at Nikki. "She dies, your freakish babies die, and you live with it. Fair trade for what you've done to me." Nikki stepped out from behind Ryan and stood beside him, her hand finding his. Her voice came calm as still water. "Before you do something you'll hang for, Mr. Blackwood, you should know the territorial marshal is on his way here. Right now. You're bluffing." The sound of approaching horses proved otherwise. Marshal Webb rode in with 5 deputies, guns drawn. Elena stood in the doorway behind them, her face pale but determined. She'd sent for help the moment the riders appeared. "Silas Blackwood," the marshal said, dismounting. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, witness intimidation, and assault." Blackwood's face purpled with fury. He pointed a shaking finger at Nikki. "This is her fault. That old woman destroyed everything I built." Nikki met his eyes without flinching. "This old woman just watched your empire fall, Mr. Blackwood, and I'll be here long after you're gone." The arrest happened quickly. Blackwood and his men disarmed, hands bound, led away to face justice. But what happened next surprised everyone. More riders appeared on the horizon. Townspeople from Silver Creek families who'd heard the commotion. Neighbors who'd decided enough was enough. They came armed and ready to defend, even though the danger had passed. Mrs. Peterson, who'd mocked Nikki in the general store months ago, approached with tears in her eyes. "We were wrong about you, Mrs. Montgomery, about all of it." That evening, with Blackwood in custody and his threat finally ended, the ranch filled with unexpected celebration. People brought food, shared stories, stayed to help with preparations for the coming harvest. The community that had rejected Nikki now embraced her. Ryan found her on the porch as the sun set, watching the gathering with wonder in her eyes. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands gentle on her swollen belly. "You could have been killed," he whispered. "So could you." She leaned back against him. "But we're still here. We're still standing." Inside, Elena laughed at something someone said. Martha's voice rose in a story about another impossible birth she'd attended. The sound of community, of belonging, of home. 2 months later, at the Autumn Harvest Festival, the town of Silver Creek celebrated a miracle. But the miracle wasn't just Nikki's impossible pregnancy or Blackwood's defeat. The miracle was that a woman told she was too old to matter had proven that love, courage, and new beginnings recognize no age limit. And the greatest miracle was still to come. The September Harvest Festival transformed Silver Creek into something magical. The whole town gathered, and at the center of it all stood Nikki, 8 months pregnant with twins, glowing beside Ryan like living proof that miracles existed. Ryan climbed onto the platform, his storm blue eyes finding hers in the crowd. This woman saved my life, my ranch, and my soul. She defied every limitation society tried to place on her, and soon she'll give me the greatest gift I never thought I'd have again, a family. He held up a silver bracelet, handmade. 3 images engraved into the metal. A mountain for Montana home. A barn for ranch legacy. A woman standing tall for Nikki herself. You were never too old, Nikki Montgomery. You were always exactly right. The crowd erupted in cheers. Even those who'd mocked her now applauded. Walking home beneath stars that night, Nikki whispered, "I'm grateful that broken rancher saw me that day in the town square." Ryan pulled her close. "Best moment of my life." Mid-December brought the coldest night of winter and labor pains that bent Nikki double. Ryan rode through a blizzard to fetch Martha, while Elena boiled water and prepared the cabin. 18 hours of agony followed. Martha's weathered hands worked steadily, but her face showed concern. She's strong, but carrying twins at 65. This is hard. Ryan refused to leave, his hand gripping Nikki's through every contraction. When the first cry split the air, tears streamed down his face. "Emma rose," Martha announced, placing the wailing infant on Nikki's chest. But moments later, complications. The second baby was breech. Nikki's strength flagged. The room held its breath through terrifying minutes of danger. Then Martha's skill and Nikki's stubborn will prevailed. A second cry, smaller but fierce. "Sarah Grace," Ryan whispered, cradling both daughters while Nikki collapsed back, exhausted but radiant. "You did it," he sobbed, kissing her forehead. "My God, Nikki, you did it." Days later, with Nikki recovering and Ryan and Elena caring for the twins, Elena held Sarah with tears in her eyes. Would it be okay if I stayed? Helped you raise them?" Nikki reached for the girl's hand. "You're already family, Elena. This is your home." Spring 1888 arrived with green valleys and new beginnings. The ranch thrived. Elena courted a young ranch hand, while Nikki and Ryan encouraged her with knowing smiles. The twin girls grew strong, their cries and laughter filling the house with life. On the porch one evening, Ryan held Emma while Nikki cradled Sarah. The valley stretched before them, cattle grazing, future bright. "I never thought I'd have this again," Ryan said quietly. "A family, a home, a future." "Neither did I," Nikki whispered. "But here we are." At 66, Nikki looked at her daughters and saw not an impossibility, but a promise kept. The world had told her she was too old for love, too old for purpose, too old to matter. But Ryan Montgomery had seen the truth. She was never too old. She was exactly what he and the world needed. Their story wasn't about age. It was about seeing beyond what everyone else saw. It was about courage, love, and the stubborn refusal to let society's cruelest judgments define them. The ranch thrived. The family grew. The legacy was built not on what they were told they couldn't have, but on what they fought to claim. And every morning when Nikki woke to Ryan's arms around her and her daughter's voices calling, she knew some things have no age limit: love, purpose, new beginnings, hope. Years would pass, and the story of Nikki L. Larue would become legend in Silver Creek. The woman who was abandoned at 65 and told she was too old for everything. Too old to work, too old to love, too old to matter. But Nikki proved them all wrong. She proved that worth isn't measured in years but in strength of character. That love doesn't diminish with age, it deepens, becomes richer, more precious. That new beginnings don't end at 30 or 40 or 50 or 65. They begin whenever you have the courage to reach for them. Ryan Montgomery saw what everyone else refused to see. Not an old woman past her prime, but a survivor. A partner, an equal, someone exactly right. Together they built something beautiful. A ranch that thrived, a family that grew, A love that defied every limitation society tried to impose. Twin daughters who would grow up knowing their mother fought for the right to exist, to love, to create life against impossible odds. Nikki L. Larue was never too old. She was exactly right. If you've ever been made to feel invisible because of your age, if you've been told your best days are behind you, let this story be your reminder. Your worth doesn't expire. Your capacity for love doesn't diminish. Your right to new beginnings doesn't end. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not invisible. You matter. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss stories that remind you that age is just a number, but courage, love, and hope are eternal. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever defied the world's expectations, because your story matters too, and it's never too late to write a new chapter.